NHTI is located on Ndakina, the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, both past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude this land and the waterways and the people who have stewarded them throughout the generations. In Joy Harjo's poem called Let There Be No Regret, she says, the songs and stories that formed us are restless and need a place to live in the world of our grandchildren. They are weary with waiting. So our goal tonight is to hear your voices and your stories and your concerns.
I'll introduce myself in my language because that's what we do as Indigenous people. Kwai and Louise Liz Charlebois and Dai Wantastigut. I'm Abenaki. I was raised as Abenaki. I've been involved with my culture since I was very little. My mom is a storyteller and a craftsperson. I am a singer, a dancer, an artist, multimedia artist. I'm also a small-scale farmer that focuses on Northeast Indigenous seeds, a seed keeper, and I'm a nurse. So, and Paula may have mentioned, I'm also an alum of NHTI. I actually hold 3 degrees from NHTI, General Studies, Liberal Arts, and Nursing. And I just recently finished my Bachelor of Nursing at SNU. So I'm a New Hampshire girl through and through. Let's see. So my role in the community, other than just being a visible presence in the community, I also served on the Commission of Native American Affairs for 6 years, 3 of which I was chair. I also do a number of different events, both events like this, talking on panels about social issues, racial issues, but also in terms of Indigenous farming and seed keeping. So I just basically like to say that I'm the mouthy Abenaki chick from over there that, just talks about just about anything. Geez, I don't know, what else can I tell you? Basically, I'm just an Indigenous person trying to get through the world and make it a better place.
Kwai, Ndelawasin, Denise Pouliot, Wadelawasin, Paul Pouliot. I'm Denise Pouliot, this is Paul Pouliot. I'm the head female speaker of the Cowasuck Band of the Pennacook-Abenaki People.
I'm the Sagamore, Paul Pouliot, head male speaker of the Cowasuck Band, Pennacook-Abenaki People.
My name is Andy Bullock. I'm the executive director at Mount Kearsarge Indian Museum in Warner, which continues to be Abenaki territory. And I've been with the museum for about 3 years as the director.
We're a pre-constitutional tribe. We like to use that terminology because there were no treaties, no ceded lands, no warfare where we signed treaties of any significance. And most of the land deeds we've been researching in New Hampshire have been frauds. So there was no deeded land, as colonials would like to say it happened. So we could get into that, but I'm not going to.
It's a really big homeland. And, there were there was farmland, there was hunting grounds, there was fishing grounds, so families moved from place to place. And even later on, when the tourist basket trade came around, people would move from their winter homes to tourist attractions to sell baskets. So I generally prefer the term Indigenous. I don't necessarily get worked up by Native American or even Indian per se, because I feel like there are greater issues that face Indigenous people that's semantics. However, when in doubt, identify someone by their tribe. Ultimately, I am Abenaki. So if you identify someone as their tribe or their tribal background, you can't go wrong. America is not our name for this land, so it's really a misnomer anyways. So yeah, in short, Indigenous, or just identify somebody by their tribe.
It's really how you say something and how you address those people rather than the specific words in my mind. And I've been around lots of people of an age that oftentimes, will call themselves Indian, or, it's not so much a factor. And a lot of times I think people try and sterilize or sanitize these conversations. And I think it comes down to, really how you address people and certainly treat them with respect. Thank you.
Indigenous people, I think, because that's the international standard now. So the UN standard. You're on Pennacook land. You're on the floodplains of where there was a village site up on the highlands where all the state offices, the registry, that was a major village overlooking the Merrimack. You're on the intervale where probably the corn was growing and all of the farming was done along the intervale. So you're basically in the heart of what was considered Pennacook lands right now. We're at Quinnipippy, which is the place where the Winnipesaukee narrows at Alton Bay and in that area. It means where the lake narrowed to a point.
Our homeland is pretty vast. I mean, it takes up New Hampshire, takes up Vermont, a huge part of Quebec, parts of New York, parts of Maine, parts of Massachusetts.
As tribal leaders, it's not just one thing. Think of it as like we've got a quasi government to government relationship. We have to deal with our federal government. We have to deal with our own personal tribal issues. We're not just narrowly focused on one issue, but during the pandemic, we've become community players. We're in all of the COVID task force for the state. We're part of the New Hampshire Public Health Association task force dealing with food insecurity. We're partnered with the Renew group dealing with all the issues that the pandemic has risen, which is green jobs and job
Housing.
housing, job inequality, environmental awareness, a whole cadre of things. So we deal with everything from dam licensing and permits for dams to cell towers to
Repatriation.
repatriation if they come up. And
Mostly that we're not extinct, we're still here.
and that's what we kept on hearing in Concord, that this was a tourist state. Indians only pass through here going to Canada. Why do we keep on telling our children lies about him finding America? The history has been written in warfare and all that kind of things. We were dismissed so quickly because colonial Puritans didn't really record us properly at all.
Our focus is education.
Education. Yeah, I'm educating myself as I go along.
The town of Warner did just recently recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. So we're really excited about that. There was a small group of people from town who worked very hard on that. And so we're quite excited that this second Monday of October will be the first one in Warner. And they've actually indicated that that is going to be the holiday that the town will celebrate officially, rather than Columbus Day. So I think small steps like that, and in some cases big steps like that, really go a long way.
I sort of got involved 4 years ago with Indigenous studies and Indigenous education when I took this internship from my crazy professor that it started off this whole great thing. Well, I didn't start it off, but it was part of the start of Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, or INHCC for short, which is an amazing community group that is based out of the University of New Hampshire, but involves people of all walks of life, all disciplines. It's basically just community members who care about Indigenous issues and want to make a difference somehow. We do everything from online mapping of important Indigenous locations in New Hampshire, to education, speaking on panels like this, to I wrote a policy brief advocating for changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
I think in my mind, keep in mind that typically or traditionally Native populations are an oral tradition based thing. And a lot of people want the book on how to whatever it is. If it's crafts or language, give me the book, tell me what I need to do to learn this thing now. And I would just encourage you, education comes in the strangest times. So if you're helping serve soup at a feast, those conversations are really important. And if you're whatever, digging a trench, it's those people that you're going to meet along the way there that will really give you the best lesson, because you're not going to get that out of a book.
But back when I first started kind of getting interested in these types of issues, I kind of had to create my own educational opportunities. I did independent studies and internships, and every class project that I got to pick the topic was about, you know, Indigenous policy. And I think it's a shame that I didn't really have the courses provided to teach about these issues. So I think that that's something that's really important, is having, you know, a minor or a major or some sort of course, like dedicated courses to these issues, because that's how people like me and Emily will get involved and will hopefully contribute to the effort to raising awareness and, you know, letting Indigenous people shine.
I was told, well, we don't have any Indians here. Absolutely no support at all. And you guys may know that there's a historical marker at NHTI. As an Indigenous student, I was never polled. Nobody said anything to me about it. The only reason I showed up at the opening is because one of my professors said, hey, did you know that this is happening in an hour? So I went, you know, because at that point I was also serving on the Commission of Native American Affairs and hadn't heard anything about it. And although that marker is not the worst one that's out there, it's not necessarily the wording that I would have chosen had I had an active say in it. You know, you got to be more supportive of your Indigenous students. I was at NHTI for a very long time as a single mom, putting myself through nursing school. It took a while. And as far as I knew, I was the only Indigenous student at the school. Whether that's true or not, there was no outlet for Indigenous students to meet, to talk, to do anything. And so how can people support Indigenous people in the greater world? The biggest thing is let the Indigenous people take the lead. You know, it's okay to be supportive roles. Let your Indigenous voices be heard. It's okay to help from the background. And please take that in the vein that I mean it. But you know, it's okay for Indian people to shine. So you know, one of the things that I've always said when I'm teaching non-Native people is, you know, the first thing you have to do is you have to listen. The most important thing that you can do is listen to those voices, and then go from there. Enthusiasm is fabulous. We love enthusiasm, but you have to let the Indigenous people lead.
So pandemics aside, in September, October, November, every third grader in New Hampshire pretty much comes to the museum, and we're really thankful about that. But one of the things that I've kind of seen since I've been on the ground there, yes, we can have that conversation and take people through our 7 galleries and have a conversation with third graders on a very meaningful level. So we've got about a 5-acre arboretum with 85 different species of trees, and we've got a 2-acre wooded walk that's pretty, gives people a flavor of life in New England here. And so when people come into the museum, we can have a conversation with third graders at that level, but then we can also take that same conversation, bulk it up a little bit, And then we can talk about Indigenous trade, and we can talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and we can have a conversation about ash trees and the emerald ash borer beetle that's decimating the ash trees in New England. So from that one collection that's relatively static, we can have a lot of meaningful conversations on different levels.
One thing that's always been important to me is to recognize that Indigenous history is messy, it's ugly, and there are things that are really horrifying. And, you know, part of education is finding a way to talk about those uncomfortable truths and meeting the person that you're talking to at their level and getting those conversations out there. Because, you know, Andy mentioned missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's a huge issue right now in both the United States and Canada. But, you know, talking about things like residential schools and, you know, health disparities and the reservation period and all of those ugly, ugly things that happened in our history is super important.
We redid the entire museum, the walkway. We brought in all kind of artists. We brought all kind of resources into it.
Right, we labeled everything we could in Abenaki.
And it was great. And who did it impact? It impacted many of the homeschooled, the non-DOE students, the ones that are charter schools. So we realized there was a big problem here. You know, the bread and butter ones, you know, this town municipal school systems really didn't want to engage this. And yet we found that, you know, we just weren't marketing it right. And that's why Emily and us and, you know, have been going to these conferences, trying to get the word out there. It's a rich environment. It fulfills a lot of obligations about the history of the state. And once you get the children hooked on it, maybe you can get into those conversations about genocide and you know, stealing land and all the other social constructs.
It's really important for people to know that not all Native people look like you see on TV. I look like a lot of Abenaki women. A lot of Abenaki women look like me, you know? So, but I frequently will get, well, you don't look Indian. And I answer to them, well, actually I kind of do, you know, I look like all the Indian women in my family, you know? So those are the backbones of the education that needs to be happening. And I mentioned this earlier, there are so many issues and broad, you know, significant issues that Indigenous people in the United States face, that this question is really just the building block of all of those. You know, once you realize that Indigenous people are here and we don't all look like we came out of Dances with Wolves, you know, or a John Wayne movie, then that leads to greater education and enhanced understanding.
The museum has been working hard to survive the pandemic too, like we all have in our own ways. We have a contemporary art gallery in the museum, and typically each year we feature two different artists who can kind of reimagine that space however they would like. Again, with the pandemic, we kind of fell off that a little bit, but I'm hoping in the next week or so to be able to announce our contemporary art gallery person for this year.
So just to kind of give you a rough idea, I've been developing a curriculum, very short. It's a 2-week-long curriculum, so it's a mini one, but based off of the 13 Moons unit, based off of the 13 moons a year in the life of an Abenaki child. So there are lesson plans that correspond to those moons. We, as a collective, have given presentations at different teaching conferences, have worked, I know Denise and Paul in their education work have done a lot of presentations at different elementary schools, schools in general, not just elementary. But, you know, I think a lot of, you know, our group's initiative is to consider education and public education both in school and just for our general public surrounding Indigenous knowledge, exploring it, tapping into it, and finding just the amazing value that exists in all of that, and being able to create resources for people so that they feel comfortable teaching about them, so that they feel comfortable exploring them, and we can celebrate a lot of this knowledge that we don't necessarily credit towards Indigenous peoples, and it's something that needs to be credited towards Indigenous peoples and celebrated.
We identified that education in New Hampshire is sorely lacking, especially in the historical social studies area in particular. So like Emily said, we were really focused initially on K through 12 curriculum. Could we develop one for the state? And, you know, we're ambitious, but, you know, we realize this is a daunting thing. At what level do you start an educational program? It's great to do stuff from first to maybe the fourth grade. It's pretty easy, but then you've got to expand that out all the way through 12, you know, so it gets very complicated, time-consuming type of environment.
I was just blown away probably the second week I was on the job, and a professional couple came into the museum absolutely convinced that there were no Native people left in New England for 200 years, and just totally surprised me. The other thing that we always seem to work around is another group of people that believe that it's just one monolithic group of people who think alike and dress alike. And so my effort at the museum is to work to dispel those two things. The role of our museum is to be a focal point for these conversations and to invite people in to have those, rather than the museum telling people what to think. It's really think, do some research and realize that your neighbor is a Native person, and the person that works at the grocery store is a Native person. And so that's, in my mind, the goal of the museum.
So you brought up a Unity Park in Dakina, which is the Hannah Dustin Park project. That's a project where we built a partnership between the state, Hannah Dustin descendants, historians, town officials, and other interested parties to come up with a new park design, and which will increase community function. So what we're going to do is this is the plan. We're planning on bringing in a canoe kayak launch, so people will now have access to that area of the river for recreational use. A lot of people like to go swimming in that area. However, there is no swimming spot, and a lot of people drown because there's an undertow because of the bend in the river. So we're looking at designing a swimming area in there that will now provide a recreational spot for the community. We're discussing bringing in a rotating art exhibit to show contemporary art of New Hampshire residents that will provide a walking trail with art pieces to look at. We're going to be expanding the Hannah Dustin Monument itself will be left alone. However, we will be contextualizing the true Hannah Dustin story, which will actually throw you for a curve once that's released. So yeah, and so we're going to be bringing in new aspects of other history of the region. So it's a more inclusive park, not just the Hannah.
It's an open slate. We have the Department of Transportation, because there's a park and ride there. We're looking at the Hannah Dustin Monument's part of the forest group of the state. So it's a great partnership. Why we did it is because we saw all the Confederate monuments being torn down, Black Lives Matter, and anti-Confederate stuff. And we said, if we eliminate this monument, then there's no recognition that there was a massacre occurred there. And there was a massacre. It was not, like it's portrayed as like she was defending herself. And when you see the real narratives, oh my God, your head's going to explode, because we've uncovered so much information. It's just, if we put a full narrative out there, you're going to see that there was a different story, and Cotton Mather didn't do the story justice. And it's so close to Concord. I mean, the Merrimack itself has a huge history. So it's exciting, but we know everything has to be funded, and our state is not funding anything. So this is going to be a huge philanthropic project, artists involved. We want a memorial to the 10 Abenaki that were massacred there. We actually know more about those people than ever, and this will be part of the discussion. We know exactly who they were. So this is really where the exciting part is coming, because it was always very one-sided. Her standing there with the scalps in the hand and the tomahawk in the other, and the red paint splashed on the monument, people, vandalizing it. But, if you take that out, of history.
What will end up living is Cotton Mather's story, and we'll have no way of representing the true history that happened in the region. So you have to make a choice on what you want to have survive. And we feel the story of the region, that the true history of the region outweighs the removal of a statue. So we made that decision, and we're hoping that we'll end up with a fuller and more unified history at the end. But above and beyond the park,
The markers.
yeah, the highway markers. That's an ongoing project. I'm currently a member of the New Hampshire Commission on Native American Affairs. And as a commission, we're all looking at all the markers right now. There are, I believe, 24 of them that all mention Indigenous people in some manner, shape, or form. And they're all currently under review to see which ones need immediate address. We're kind of ranking them in order of importance, but eventually they will all be addressed.
One of the things about the dams, we're always concerned that our waterways and our fishways have been disrupted since the 1600s. And most of these dams, a lot of them are strategically bad dams, colonial dams that red listed should be removed. And yet romantically, we try to find New England, these little water spaces and keep them when they should be freed up. Exeter was one of them that we got rid of. It was just sheer economics.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Durham one on Oyster River.
There's just a lot. We're in the middle of a bunch of dam relicensing right now, where almost every dam in the state of New Hampshire and Vermont are currently up for license renewal. And if those license renewals all go through, they won't be up for renewal again for another 99 years. So now's the time, if we want fish ladders or any other changes done to these dams, now's the time, because if not, they'll be able to close the door on that conversation for another 100 years.
We're trying to figure out how we can be cheerleaders to get open spaces made into farmlands, everything from inner city to organic farmers that are willing to share some of the space. So we're dealing with a lot of issues, and we'll bring up some of the issues about racial identity, social justice. We're starting that discussion. We had a discussion today about the garden is really important, and a space, an Indigenous space, and try to recruit. And it may mean the state has to throw some money into this to provide some scholarships. And so we recognize there's not an awful lot of staff, Indigenous staff either. And the faculty, there's only a handful that identify as Indigenous faculty. And this is another serious thing. There's no strong commitment for the state to try to recruit Indigenous people. And there's some fascinating Indigenous faculty out there that should be on campus.
Well, you can support or not support the Indigenous bills in this case by letting your representatives know. As far as on an educational level, you can hire more Indigenous professors and teachers. You can give scholarships to Indigenous students. Most of the Indigenous students have come from a poverty, based background, so they need all the financial help they can get to even make it to college. You can create an Indigenous house on campus so that Indigenous students can support each other while going through college.
Look more at bringing diversity into your campuses, and don't be, as they say, performative. Don't just do it because you're checking off a box. We see a lot of land acknowledgements as being performative. check the box. We got BIPOC people, you know, let's look at the faces. Do we have a BIPOC? Check one black, one white, one red, one Asian. It's engagement with the community. It's engaging with people socially.
It's making the connection.
It's making that connection. And you know, we're doing so many land acknowledgements now because of Zooming. It's almost like it is a check off the box thing now. And it's not right because you're not engaging the community. You don't understand. You're just fulfilling a need.
Right.
It's
So I guess engage the community.
so stop being performative, you know, and be more active, interactive.